We are activating your unique self-discovery one show at a time. The Orchard of Wisdom Self-Discovery podcast are at your fingertips, just waiting to inspire and invite you in discovering just how awesome you really are and how to navigate through life in joy, enrichment, personal abundance, in mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul. All the people we bring you are here to serve you on your journey of life. Do enjoy our next show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of An Author's Kiss right here at selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today, all the way from the UK, is Charles Christian. And we're going to be talking about the Wold Newton Triangle, where rather odd events have occurred. But we're also going to be talking about a number of other books that he's written, also his Weird Tales radio show. We're going to be talking about just the weirdness in the world. And believe me, England, UK has a lot of wonderful weirdness. And it's all about the world of weird and unexplained and bizarre, and it's all about the road trip around what he calls the Wold Newton Triangle, where rather odd events have occurred and unmatched anywhere else in Britain. He's going to talk about the werewolves, the zombies, the vampires, the green-skinned fairy folk, the headless ghosts, the screaming skulls, ancient warlords, and Parkin, the eating dragon, and so much more. We're in for a treat tonight. So we are going to go right back to Charles. And Charles, I love this wonderful world that you live in. Very often when we look at the news and we look at what's going on in the world and we think that has to be weird and fantasy, but you do take it a step further and go into that world.
I do indeed. I do indeed. I suppose my interest is that a lot of the weird stories you hear in folklore, they all have somewhere deep down an origin in fact.
Yes.
It's been lost over the centuries in many instances, but there is some source material for it, and I always intrigued to know what that source is. And it's an old cliche that fact is stranger than fiction, but it really is in some instances, and that these aren't tales that somebody 1,000 years ago said, let's tell a story about this. It didn't work that way. It was a tale somebody told, and then it's got changed over time, a bit like the joke about fishermen and how big was the fish you caught.
Yes.
And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's that it gets changed over, and we're dealing with a time when people weren't literate, things weren't written down, it was oral traditions. So it's very hard to find out what the origins of many of these tales were. But there's other little bits of evidence that crop up and say, oh, that's a link that could be relevant. I mean, you mentioned in your intro, if I can jump into one of the examples, the Parkin-eating dragon. Now, Parkin, for people who aren't from the north of England, is a gingerbread, but a spongy, treacly, sticky,
yummy with custard.
Exactly, with custard, yes. And if you really, really don't care, custard and cream, but
opulence.
Yes, but and there's a tale told about a place called Filey, which is featured in my Wold Newton book, and that has a big, long, stony headland called the Filey Brig, which is lots of rocks sticking out into the ocean. And the legend grew up that those rocks were the bones of a dragon. And the story was the dragon was flying around doing what dragons do, setting fire to things and generally being a pest. And so the locals put out this huge bowl of Parkin, and the dragon gobbled it all up. And it's very sticky stuff. And it found it got its jaws stuck together. So it went into the water to try and soak it out and get it from between its teeth and sort of
No flossing
sort it
back
off.
then.
No flossing back then. Well, dragons' little hands, they probably couldn't do the
Yeah,
flossing.
exactly.
Yeah. And then while it was busy doing that, the locals crept up and hit it over the head and killed it. And that's why
Oh,
its
poor
bones are there.
dragon.
I know, poor dragon. And you think, well, that's obviously nonsense, because we can look and see that those rocks are rocks. They're not fossil bones. It's not some large dinosaur or anything there. It's clearly a natural formation, and geologists can probably tell you how it was formed.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, on that same bay, Filey Bay, further down, there are some soft cliffs where bones of plesiosaurs, which are a dinosaur, a sea monster with a big long neck, and to anybody finding them, it would definitely fit the ticket of this must be a dragon's remains. They have been found there.
Mm.
And so, jump back in history, and people are finding these apparent dragon bones there. They know nothing about dinosaurs and paleontology and things like that. And so the story sort of gets
Mm.
confabulated, and Filey Brig, the rocky outcrop, becomes another of these dragons. There were dragons there, but millions of years ago. And there's a strange rocky outcrop that the locals couldn't explain. So they put two and two together, and they get four, whereas we wouldn't get four. And we'd say, no, that doesn't add up at all. And that's sort of one of those intriguing elements about it, that there's always something there, no matter how far-fetched it might seem. That is the origin of a story.
I always find actually, in a world of technology, in a world of such an incredible advancement, except for intellect, we don't we look to the past and the fabled tales as fake. When you excuse me, when you think about it, in those days there was no other entertainment. Storytelling was it,
Mm.
around the fire, around the table, or whatever. And as you said, things were always based in what they knew, in fact. And who are we to say that there weren't such things in those times? Were they all made up? As you said, they had to have some sort of basis in truth. I'm always want to believe more in the magical, of the fantasy, of the myth, of the mythical. For me, that is more tangible many of the time than even what we're seeing today. And I think that just because we don't see evidence of it today, or it's not clear cut, or we're too busy, too loud, too bright to see anything, that doesn't mean
Mm.
that these things didn't exist or still don't exist in some form or other.
Yeah. And I mean, that is one of the things you get with the legends of some kind of hairy relation of the human race. In America, it's Sasquatch,
Mm-hmm.
it's Yeti elsewhere. In parts of Europe, it's the wild man. Down here in my part of England, East Anglia, it's called a woodwose, which is a form of wild man.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of carvings of these woodwoses on churches, often holding up the font or over the doorway. And again, we all say, "Oh, it's all fiction," but going back 1,000 years when these things were carved, people may well have been remembering what their
Yes.
ancestors had told them, and you don't have to go that far back,
Mm-hmm.
not millions of years, but thousands of years, to the fact that we did have our cousins, if you like, wandering around with us.
Mm-hmm.
The Neanderthal we now know interbred with us, Homo sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
We've now discovered that there's the Denisovans, and that they also interbred with
Mm-hmm.
us and them. Um, we know that we're beginning to realize that the human evolutionary tree is a lot more complicated, and it's not simply monkeys at one end and us at the other.
Right.
There's lots of cousins on the
Yeah.
side, a lot of which have become extinct, but others, maybe they are still there,
Mm-hmm.
living in far-flung places, living up in the Himalayas, living in the woods of the American Northwest, large areas where, as you were saying, the noise and the
Mm.
light of modern life isn't available. And I mean, we had a story, what, 5, 6 years ago, of remains of a small species found on an Indonesian island of Flores that they called the Hobbit.
Hmm.
And it was creatures 3 to 4 feet tall. And they lived through until, you know, human times, 10,000, 15,000 years ago. So they would have interrelated with us. And the natives on that island, say they still exist. They just make a point of not crossing the paths of
Not
humans and
mingling.
hiding.
You're not going to see
Yeah,
them
not
down at the
mingling.
pub.
Yeah, exactly. Keeping out of the way.
Right.
And
And
well,
I don't
well,
blame them.
a smart thing, because we
Yes.
tend to want to
Yeah.
shoot them
Exploit.
and stuff them if we find them. You know,
Yes.
our solution to everything: let's hunt it.
Yeah, let's
And
hunt it, let's kill it, let's dissect it and study it instead of just talk to it.
yes, and then we
Yeah.
say they're extinct, now. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that
wonder
was the last
why.
one you killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could
um,
be our own worst enemy.
yeah, and I say, you can't just say, oh, it's a nonsense story.
Mhm.
There's an origin for it,
Yes.
and there's that question mark. Well, they could still exist, and say the Woodwoes, that is the local version around here. There are still reports of people on lonely roads. We're an area where there's lots of forests and things,
Hmm.
people driving down lonely roads at night and seeing a hairy human-like creature running across the road in front of them and into the woods at the other side. And, obviously some people probably making them up, but others, are they seeing something? Are they finding, and having encounters with these relics of our ancestry that are still out there?
Um, I'm probably going to go a bit weirder, because I actually do believe that uh, I do believe in quote aliens. I think they did come to this planet to make it its own, and I think humans were kind of, if not manufactured, somehow produced, maybe as you say, through the mixing, um,
Mm,
and uh, and that we're all descendants of that, um, and that's why we have, I think, kind of different spiritual intellects that go through us all. Um, and I think this is why, some people have such an affinity maybe with the stars or with the land. It's just that attunement to it, to everything. For me, I will believe in something until proven not. Because
yeah.
for me, it's like, who am I to say it doesn't exist? In the thousands and thousands of years that the planet has been inhabited, who are we to say it can't be real?
Mm,
In a world that didn't have much travel, didn't have the intrusion of other people from other countries, didn't have satellite or Google or anything else, in that world, who's to say that there weren't all these wonderful creatures that were descendants of, that they just simply died out along the line,
mm,
and kind of leaving a trace behind here and there. Um, I find that, we love to dismiss things without looking at the possibility of the truth in it, or going further back than what our eyes want to see and going, but what about the beginning? What
mm,
about, even before the dinosaurs? What kind of were there humans around that time? Were they actually humans, or were they other type humanite creatures? And I think if we're not willing to open our minds to possibilities and look at these things, we're denying a great deal of, where we came from, how we got here, who we are today, because we are constantly living this outside life instead of an inside life. And I think if we could step into our attunement, we would actually open up um, our spiritual intellect to actually understanding there's so much more out there than we can comprehend right now.
mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, if there were other creatures occupying this planet a long, long, long time ago, pre-dinosaurs, go back to you, there'd be no evidence of it because there's been such changes in the
Yes.
planet. We know that there were different continents and there were different shapes. And we know there were all these mass extinctions that went through history.
Right.
But all the changes, the stuff has been lost
Yeah.
for millions and millions of years. The physical evidence has gone. You know,
Except
fossils
for
last.
landmarks, like, the pyramids, which actually, interestingly enough, had a wonderful guy on that discovered the Bosnian pyramid, which is one of the biggest in the world, and discovered
Mm,
that these pyramids were placed around the world, not to house the pharaohs, but actually as energy sources. And that
mm,
when they were all switched on, they would actually extract energy from the universe to power the world. But then something went wrong.
yeah,
So um, we look at all those structures and we think man built that. I don't think so. Not without help.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's those ruins that are being investigated in Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
the Gabeli, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue,
It will come
Gabeli,
to you.
yeah, Gabeli Tepe, I think, Tepe. Um, and they are about 10,000 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got advanced, sophisticated carvings on
Mm-hmm.
them and a structure. And quite clearly, it was a ritual center, a temple. There's
Mm-hmm.
no sort of function. But the thing is, 10,000 years ago, we were just coming out of the ice ages in
Yes.
Europe. And these people appear to have come from nowhere
Mm-hmm.
and built this advanced temple.
Mm-hmm.
They're building that several thousand years. If you go by conventional archaeology,
Mm-hmm.
they're building that several thousand years before the pyramids. Um,
And before
they're
tools
also,
were invented.
well, before tools were invented, and also they appeared to be able to support a large
Mm-hmm.
community, and that they had some form of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, that comes, we have sort of conventional history talks about the Neolithic revolution, and people started planting seeds and crops were growing and taming animals, etc., all of which takes time. You can't just do that with
Yeah.
a click of the fingers. But these people appear to have suddenly appeared after an ice age with all these skills. So that suggests that
Mm-hmm.
they had these skills prior to that. And if you were going prior to the ice ages or the last ice age, that's taking you back 20 plus thousand years,
Yes.
which conventional historians and archaeologists will say no, doesn't happen. This is how it goes. This is
Mm.
this is the model. So this tends to suggest, even if they were humans, and let's just stick with the assumption that they were members of the same species as us, they had an advanced civilization before,
Yeah.
if you like, the conventional timelines. And then you start saying, well, is this proof of the existence of places like Atlantis and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
higher
Yes.
civilizations that would have been swept away by the ice ages
Mm-hmm.
and water level changes and things? And there is a theory that the Black Sea used to be dry, and that one of the events of the ice ages was that the gap through the Bosphorus was cut through and the area was flooded. And certainly archaeologists are finding stuff down in the Black Sea. Well, there could have been another cradle of
Mm-hmm.
civilization, but one pre-ice age
Yeah.
lurking there. And so all our views on history and what happened are all completely skewed.
Yes.
And you attack that. Well, how many other things that we've always been told by people, this is the orthodox view, how many of those other things are also fake, not fake, based on a false premise, and
Right.
that something did happen before? And once you accept that, then you can accept that there may have been advanced civilizations before our current one, and there may have been other creatures, intelligent beings occupying the earth, and that they were lost 10,000, 20,000 years ago.
I believe so. That is definitely my belief. And I've interviewed a lot of conduit writers where literally all of it was written, just the channeled through them. One was on Atlantis, actually, and how that came about, and how actually from just being people from another source that was recognized, because it was them and the Earthlings, how it came about that Atlantis sank, but how then they will start to be revered as gods elsewhere. So,
Mm.
And let's face it, that, humans like godly type images.
Mm.
And so, whether they came as gods or whether they were promoted to gods,
Yeah.
one doesn't know. So, but it's, I think is that I've always had a very open mind on all of this. And I suppose it's because I've had too many experiences myself to deny them. As you said, there's all an element of truth in anything. But the werewolf,
Mm-hmm.
where does that come from? I mean, is there a speck of truth somewhere along the line? Is it because they got bit, or what are we looking at there?
Right. Well, the werewolf is a story in my Weird Wolves book, and it's one I first heard when I was a kid, and it was that there was a werewolf used to stalk a particular road, and it first appeared in the Middle Ages, and it was a shape-shifting werewolf in the sense of it was a human by day, and then by night it turned into a wolf and led a wolf pack that would attack people. And the suggestion was by day it would mingle with crowds at markets and inns and learn who was going to be traveling along a particular lonesome road. And the geography of the area was there was only one road you could go across if
Mm,
you were to avoid the marshes,
right.
or avoid going up a very steep hill. So it was a logical route people would take, and it would lurk and attack. And I say there was actually an account in the 1960s of a lorry driver saying that his truck was attacked by this huge wolf-like creature. And he said that he was driving along this lonesome road and saw two orangey lights in the distance, which he assumed were the tail lights of a car.
Mm-hmm.
And he only, when he got closer, realized it was the fiery eyes of a wolf coming towards him.
Mm.
And say that was the 1960s, but there were earlier tales of it, and most of the original ones go back to the Middle Ages. And this werewolf was called Old Stinker because it had a putrid breath, because it ate on carrion and other unpleasant things. And it used to lurk around there. So I was intrigued because it was on my home turf, just a few miles from where I lived at the time. And werewolves are relatively rare in English folklore.
Mm-hmm.
They're a thing in European and in Native American,
Yeah.
North American cultures, and even in the Far East, the Japanese, I think, have a
And then
similar thing.
you can't say coincidence, really, can you? If they're documented so far around the world, this
Yes,
is just that fairy tale didn't reach around the world. There has to be some truth in it.
there has to be some truth in it.
Mhm.
But I say it was just intriguing that there was this one outbreak there. And what I found looking into it was the area was plagued by wolves in the, we're talking the 10th century, so, before Norman conquest and everything. And it was so many wolves, they would come off the Yorkshire wolds, the hills, in winter down into the valleys and attack people when the weather on the Wolds was too bleak and wintry for
Mm-hmm.
them. And it was such a problem that a hostel was built. And the ancient charter says, so travelers don't risk being eaten by wolves. So there clearly
Ah,
was a problem with
right.
wolves.
Mm-hmm.
But the werewolf thing is 1066. We had in England the last Viking invasion,
Mm-hmm.
and they landed in a number of places and eventually went to Stamford Bridge near York and had a battle with King Harold and were killed. However, one particular band landed in Scarborough, my old tramping ground, and burned the town down and then marched inland past this area where there are reports of the werewolf. So, you are a Saxon peasant fearing for your life, and this bloodthirsty band of Vikings go
Mm-hmm.
past. And as we know, if we've watched the television series and
Yeah.
like, there's a type of Viking known as a berserker who would be hyped up on um, alcohol and plant-based drugs and things, psyched themselves up that they were fearless killing machines, and they would rush into battle not wearing armor, swinging huge swords or axes, clad in the skins of either bears or
Right.
wolves.
Yeah.
And the leader of them, a character called uh, Tostig, I think his name was. No, Harold Hardrada. Harold Hardrada. He was the leader of this band. He was a berserker. And you imagine you're a Saxon
Mm.
peasant fearing for your life, peering out from the woods somewhere or hidden in a barn, and you see these blood splattered people going past wearing wolf skins and bear skins. Now, are they half bear and half man, or are they a man in a bear skin, or is it some kind of mixture? And you know, werewolf means half man, half
Yeah.
half wolf. And it again, was this the coincidence that
Mm.
triggered it all off and started it? That there was a source of an understandable source that was then these terrible creatures, these werewolves were running around.
Right.
Did it come from there? I mean,
And I suppose if somebody started exhibiting berserky type attitude, they'll think that they must have been bitten by the werewolf.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Because
uh,
I mean, a lot of our werewolf lore actually comes from um, movies in the 1930s,
yeah.
the Werewolf of London and the Wolfman. Um, and they were the ones that started the idea that if you shot a werewolf with a silver bullet, it
Hmm.
would return to the human form it was previously. Whereas in earlier times, they didn't have that idea
Right.
of shooting them with silver. The Germans were obsessed with werewolves, and while everybody else was hanging or burning witches, the Germans were obsessed with finding werewolves, and they just regarded them as uh, monsters that you had to hack to death with whatever was suitable for hacking to death a large monster. So we've got sort of a slightly glamorized idea of
Hmm.
them in recent times. It's a bit like vampire tales.
Yes.
A
Yes.
lot of it, it's Bram Stoker and
Hmm.
Dracula is the one that is the source material, and wearing and the initial movie versions wearing the dinner jacket and the white tie and the cape and things. Um, it's and that has now become, if you like, the accepted norm. But
Yeah.
prior to that, they were seen as something different.
Have you got a favorite Dracula movie?
Oh, I think probably that one, Dracula AD 1972, which was about the last of them, but it actually has
Christopher Lee?
Christopher Lee as Dracula
Mm-hmm.
and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing's
Mm-hmm.
descendant, and it's set in swinging London. And so, bunch of swinging guys say, "Hey, won't it be fun if we try and raise a vampire?" And lo, they do. It all ends in tears.
I remember being a kid, my mum would go to drama, I'd be left at home, and no remote at that time, and a lot of the TV was still black and white. And I remember watching a Dracula in black and white, and somehow because of the lighting, it was always so much scary. And then when somebody melted, they managed to make it look, really. And I'd be by the TV switching channels when it got too scary, and then come back again.
Yes.
But it was Gary Oldman, isn't it, that did that one? Was it in the 90s? Um, gosh, I think
Yes.
Greystoke's Dracula or something like that, which was quite a good one. Bram
Yeah,
Stokes, Bram Stokes.
Bram Stoker's Dracula, I
Right,
think, is the full title because it
right.
was not quite, but yes, that was a very good one on that one.
And then, of course, you've
Yeah.
got Vampire Diaries and all of that, and of course the Twilight things. And I mean, obviously, I think the reason why these movies and things are always so popular is that there is just that little question mark at the back of the head. Could this be real? Could this be
Hmm.
real? And I think that is why people are drawn to it. What if? What if? And then, or the fantasy that, well, I could live forever and just suck people's blood. And they're like,
Hmm.
why would you
Hmm.
want to? But it's all
Yeah.
there, right? Isn't it? We love the fantasy of it, because sometimes our own reality kind of sucks. And so we like going into the fantasy of it because it seems to be based in something potentially real.
Yes. And it's the escapism.
Yeah,
We're escaping from the mundane life we're living, and we're doing something just exciting and
yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yes.
Now, the
Yes, because I
mistake.
mean, nobody ever wants to become Frankenstein's monster
No.
or the mummy.
I know. And I
Walk
think
around in bandages or
yeah,
with a
Gene
bolt
Wilder's
through your neck.
Frankenstein was perfect.
Yes.
That was just such a good one. Um, the mysterious World Newton Triangle. What is
Mhm.
that? Where is that? Let's talk about that a bit.
Right. Well, this again is going back to my youth, and as was the fashion in the 1950s when I was growing up, you got taken out by your parents in the family car and you'd go on an outing somewhere and
Mhm.
um, end up at a stately home and hear the stories and have tea and cakes and come
Mhm.
home. And I sort of soaked up all these stories from this area. And say the Wold Newton Triangle is a part of East Yorkshire. It's south of Scarborough and north of Hull. And it's a rural area and very sparsely populated and still relatively sparsely populated. And I spent a lot of time going round there and picking up these stories and realized there was just this wealth of material
Mm.
out there that people didn't appear to know about. And I just thought it was intriguing and worthy of encapsulating and looking at the area. There's a big headland called Flamborough Head that sticks out into the sea, and two sides of the triangle are the headland, and there's a road that cuts through it, and most of the activity is between the road and that headland. And so, lo and behold, we have a triangle. And if
Mm.
you're going to describe an area, a triangle always sounds interesting. And
Yes,
it just seemed to be everything was happening there.
in
And
the triangle.
within this
Hmm.
triangle area, the werewolf I mentioned, he's at the top end of it.
Hmm.
Some of the other stories you mentioned also feature in there. And Wold Newton is a little small village in the middle of it. And its claim to fame was in the 1790s, what was then the largest meteorite ever to
Mm.
land on in England, crashed down on the ground there in on a Sunday afternoon, and was well publicized because it fell on a property belonging to a sort of classic Regency era rake sort of hunting shooting type
Mm-hmm.
person. And he took it off down to London and charged people a penny a time to see it in somewhere on Pall Mall or
How
Piccadilly.
big was it?
I think it was £56,
Oh,
and so it's quite a big one.
right.
Um, you can still find it in the Science Museum, and it was a metallic one, and it sort of obviously would have lost a lot burning off, but
Mm.
it was a rare one because it didn't land in the sea or somewhere where nobody's about.
Right.
There was some poor farm labourer working, and it came crashing down near him, and he saw the impact in the ground and said, when it landed, he could feel the warmth coming from it, the heat
Mm.
coming from it. And so that sort of just I found, as sort of a focal point for it. And
Mm.
we're talking about energy
Yes.
from pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of ley lines running through this
Mm-hmm.
area. And, was it attracted by the energy of the
Yes.
ley line?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's also been picked up by Philip Jose Farmer, who was a science fiction writer, and in the 1970s he was writing quote unquote biographies of fictional characters, including Tarzan,
Mm-hmm.
and he built up this story that Tarzan's immediate ancestors and a lot of other what we'd now call superheroes, they were all people who were riding in a stagecoach nearby when this meteorite crashed, and they were exposed to radiation, which
Ah,
gave them superpowers.
right.
And so he's got, an ancestor not just of Tarzan,
Yes.
but of Sherlock Holmes is
Mm-hmm.
in there. Lots of other villains. He's even got Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice
Oh my
in there.
goodness.
In the bit.
Did he become a superhero? His is making women faint.
Yeah, exactly. That was what is your superpower? I make women faint. Yes. Bit limited.
Yes.
I
Fall in
suppose if
love
you were
then.
a dentist or something, you might be able to use it. But it is a bit limited. And I say that was it. So again, I thought, well, that's intriguing that this guy
Mm,
writing in the States found that it found that interesting. And the more I scraped, the more odd stories I found,
mm,
and it just intrigued me. And I say the at a place called Rudston, there is the largest standing stone in the United Kingdom. It's taller than any of the stones
Stonehenge.
at
Oh, really?
Stonehenge.
And there before Stonehenge?
About the same time, about
Okay.
the same time. And it's now incongruously right next to a church. The Christians doing the thing of, well, this is where the pagans used to come and pray. We'll just take over the site. And
Mm,
they initially stuck a cross on the top of it and put it next to the church and told everybody, oh, this was just an attempt by the devil to throw a stone at the church and destroy it. But Christianity survived and was more powerful. So this goes to prove we are the top religion and come to church next Sunday, please. And but when that was set up, um, the area would have been a lot clearer. The stone would
mm,
have been brighter.
yeah.
It would have stood out like a huge monument.
Right.
And again, digging into it, it was clearly some form of sacred landscape
Mm.
because there's an awful lot of burial mounds, barrows, or tumuli around that area, far more than the population would
Have,
apparently command.
right.
A lot of them are lost now due to farming, but there are still some very big ones, and they've been excavated. And the what's been found suggests they were clearly, prominent individuals
Hmm.
who were being buried there. There's lots of earthworks called circuses, which people thought they used to race chariots around, but it's now thought that it was some kind of area where young men would do rites of passage, rites of rituals, throwing spears and
Hmm.
firing arrows and things. And so there was clearly a lot of fascination in this area, that it was, you know, some kind of magical area to all the people living it at that time and in that area. You know,
The hot
uh,
spot, right? And of
it
course,
was a
the
hotspot.
triangle, yeah, the triangle is always considered unbreakable. So, um, I mean, obviously, Stonehenge must be another one of those spots.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm sure they're scattered all over England in some form or other.
yeah. There's a lot of legends about stone circles
Mhm.
and standing stones and what powers they've got. And obviously, it's a belief that it's at certain times of the year, it may be a multidimensional portal that beings from elsewhere can come into our world and that we can accidentally go into their world,
Mhm.
rather like the legends about uh, fairy circles,
Yes.
where with made of mushrooms. There's a
Mm.
lot of folklore says you don't go and stand in one of those, because you will go into another dimension of fairyland, and you won't
And
be
the
back
fairies
for.
are, they do exist. I have seen them. And there's also different types of fairies. Oh God, what is the author? I have it here somewhere. Bronze something. It did a beautiful book on fairies and the characteristics. He drew them, but also drew them in the image they wanted to be seen in, and the characteristics of what they were. And
Mm,
it's absolutely beautiful. And on all my books I've got here, do I have it anywhere? I do. It's somewhere over there. But it is, and just the explanation and the characteristics of each fairy. And fairies will not allow you to see them unless they've deemed worthy for you to see them.
mm, yes,
And so, and there's a lot of spots that I've come across in my life where I have seen them. Um, and there's always a reason behind it. Like if they want to be seen, they want to be seen. It's a message that they wanted to get through. But fairies, I most certainly do believe in.
yeah, yeah. Well, I say there is a story about one of the larger um, burial mounds called Wiley or Willie Howe, which now, unfortunately, having had about 1,000 years of unauthorized treasure hunters looking for buried
Yeah.
gold, looks more like a volcano crater. But there's a number of tales told of that, about men encountering fairies on the top, and
Hmm.
being trusted by them, and then, as is the case, usually getting greedy and abusing their trust, and then having
What,
nothing but
men
bad
get
luck.
greedy?
Yeah, exactly. Humans get greedy, yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
abusing their trust.
Yeah.
And there's a tale about a farmer who was riding home one night, and he could see lights coming out of it, and he went there and was invited in. And this is a medieval tale, and was offered something to drink, and he was wise enough to know that if he accepted fairy food or drink, he'd be beholden to them, and that something unfortunate might happen to him. So he wisely waited till no one was looking, then tipped the contents of the drinking goblet onto the floor, put it in his pocket and scurried away, hopped on his horse and escaped. And he successfully escaped, and he gave it to the lord of the manor, and eventually ended up with the King of England, who gave it to the King of Scotland. And there's sort of references to
Mm-hmm.
it being in the Scottish treasure. And
Mm.
so, more likely it was uh, some kind of ancient goblet that had been found, perhaps made of uh, not jade, amber or something of
Mm-hmm.
that nature, an odd material. But again, it's just reinforcing this idea of this belief that a fairy world exists and that they've got some form of parallel existence to
Mm-hmm.
us, and they're there, so
Do you believe
it's
in multiple dimensions?
I'm coming round to
Mm-hmm.
that belief that there that because there are so many tales
Mm-hmm.
of people having these encounters at places that we nowadays call a portal. Um, and I think the analogy I've heard from somebody else is it's rather as if you are living in a tower block, and there are people living below you and there are people living above you, and you never actually meet them, but you
Mm-hmm.
hear their music drifting through and you hear their footsteps moving around, and they're sort of living parallel existences to you.
Mm-hmm.
And is that what we are seeing with the Fae and Sasquatches
Mm.
and the likes?
Yeah,
They're at one
the
level,
bleeding through. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and they're bleeding through. And likewise, um, aliens, ETs, whatever, they're the people on the floor upstairs that make, there's a lot of noise coming from them, and occasionally see their flashing lights outside, but they're there. And I mean, what's also interesting is that tales of fairies were very much the thing for a very long time. But from the 1950s onwards, tales of fairy encounters tend to drop, and people are starting to have encounters with aliens
Mm.
and abductions and UFOs and things of that nature. And, are they actually the same creatures? Are they the Victorian era's
Right.
fairies
So
are
just a
modern
different
era
interpretation. Yeah.
different interpretation. And I mean, some of the descriptions of them sound similar.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the experiences people have, particularly this strange time distortion, whereby if you are in their world, time either goes a lot faster or a lot slower. And you have these endless tales of the Fae, of people thinking they've only been gone for
Yes.
24 hours. And when they come back, years have gone past and
And the other
decades
way
have
around
gone.
too, where
Yes,
you've completely been somewhere, gone for a long time, and come back, and well, no, you just shut your eyes, and
yeah,
it's no time at all. I very much do believe in dimensions, a bit of a dimensional traveler myself, and people think you could do it physically. You don't. It is that out of body experience, and you are elsewhere. Having a complete life, it's like you step into that life on the other side. And I've had some wonderful experiences and seen some wonderful places that I know are not here, and
mm,
I'm even a different person over there than I am here. And I think it's for us to think that we are, the only planet with life on it, or that there is only one layer to us, and everything is
mm,
linear. For me is not something I'm willing to believe in or will believe in, because I think we are multifaceted and there are multi dimensions and there are so many different levels that we're only scratching on. We're only beginning to
yes,
understand. And unfortunately, human nature, whether either by design or just by history, we're skeptic of everything. And it's prove it,
yes,
prove it, prove it. And if you're willing to experience you will have experiences that won't seem so fantastical because you've allowed, but this skepticism that we look at everything with is not allowing us to open up to the possibilities of what else is out there.
I think that is very, very true. And I mean, one of the issues I think is um, modern science,
Mm,
modern scientists have become very orthodox in
yeah.
their thinking because they want tenure, they
Yes.
want reputation, and if they publicly say they are interested in something in uh, what we might broadly call the paranormal, that will damage their reputation
Yeah.
and credibility. So they daren't do it. I mean, if you go back to the Victorian era, when the Society for Psychical Research was first starting, um, that was looking into ghosts, poltergeists,
Mm-hmm.
spirit mediums, and the like. But although it quite clearly included a lot of believers in it, there were also straightforward Victorian scientists who, made their name inventing chemicals or mechanical processes and stuff. These were straightforward people, but they were prepared to make the jump,
Yes.
and they were open-minded enough to say,
Yeah.
well, let's look into it. There's so many reports of it. Let's look into it. And
Yeah.
I think this is it, that there are so many reports of, for want of a better word, paranormal
Mm-hmm.
experiences that you can't just say, oh, just daft
Hooey.
people
Yeah.
with silly ideas.
Yes.
There are so many, and people who, in some instances, um, you have to say they are quite unimaginative.
Yeah.
They're not fanciful by nature, but they are having them. And
Yeah.
when somebody like that has it, well, there must be something that happened to them. And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's rather like the Project Blue Book and all the various
Mm,
investigations into UFO sightings. Um, yes, there are an awful lot that are satellites, aerial aircraft, or meteorological balloons, but there's still this percentage that can't be explained,
right.
and no one knows what they are. And all the sort of recent stuff the US Navy has been reporting about these little uh, objects flying around, they can't explain what they are. They can explain some of them, that it's a radar fault and that it's this and it's that and the other, but there's still stuff that they can't explain what it is.
And you've
Um,
got too many now with, people with phone on their camera that can capture things. And when you've got something zigzagging, going up and down and twirling up in the sky, you know that the
yeah.
plane can't do that.
Mm,
It can't be a balloon, it can't do that. You can't blame this on
yeah.
some sort of satellite thing. And so,
Yeah.
again, to think we're alone in the universe, I think is rather arrogant and ignorant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What about the theory that UFOs may actually be um, time travelers from the future?
Oh, absolutely. I actually think that we are in a lot of ways an experiment for entities that do not have a physical body, so they're having the physical
Mhm.
experience. I also think it is, where this is a school. A lot of people don't make it past kindergarten. That's why they keep coming back and again and again and again until they can graduate. And that is to uh, be the spirit having a human life, not a human life trying to be spiritual. And I think there are a great deal of those entities over there that do take human form. Um,
Mm,
and I do believe in the next while, because we're at that crutch in society that if we do not change our ways, we are going to damage this earth beyond reason, and we're going to see our own extinction, or we're going
yeah,
to blow up the world, which will have a horrible ripple effect,
yes.
out in the universe. It's also, you've got to look at every single energy signature that we have is
Mm,
conglomerately together creating an orchestra, and it needs to be harmonious for the equilibrium of the planet and the of the universe. And so I think every single ingredient a creature, every living thing, and that includes all of nature and everything, has a signature, and it's an important signature to stay on the positive side and in order to benefit us all. You're in a room with people that are negative or that are angry. What happens? You feel suppressed, you feel crushed. When you're around people that are uplifting and positive and inquisitive, then you have enlightenment and you have exploration and wonderment, and it raises people's frequency up. I think we're very governed by that frequency, and we've kind of gone below what we need to do to kind of keep this earth in an equilibrium, and we need to change because that frequency must match the universe in order for us to stay in orbit, so to speak.
Mm, mm.
There's a
Well,
far out one for you.
no. I mean, certainly we are heading on a course
Yeah.
which is going to damage the planet
Yes.
irreparably,
Yes.
and possibly already has damaged the
Right.
planet
Can we
irreparably.
turn it back now when we're looking at,
Yeah,
you know,
and we were talking earlier about mass extinctions of various creatures that
yes.
were around. The dinosaurs
Mm,
were around for millions of years, and then almost overnight
yes.
were turned into chickens, as
Yeah.
they and birds,
Right.
as some of them devolved to. um there's no sort of sanctity of life
No.
going on, and it takes us back to where we were as well. Were there previous civilizations that also wiped themselves out?
Yeah. Yes.
And
But the problem with this time, we have things like nuclear
yeah.
that can do, our technology can advance us forward or it can completely destroy us.
Mm,
And, where we haven't had that before that we know of, there's been no evidence of, we do have that now. And I think this is why we are more of a threat and a concern to the universal energies than ever before. And I think we're going to see an intervention. I think the intervention is already going on. And that's why people are having more and more sightings. More and more people are traveling dimensionally. More and more people are waking up to higher planes of frequency. So I think it's already happening, but I think we're going to see that exponentially increase
yeah.
even more because we can't do this alone. We've we've bought into the wrong mindset, and
Yes.
it's destroying us. So we have to change, and that change will be forced on us one way or other.
Yeah.
It's interesting
Yeah.
times that I always think that whatever has been has a significance as what is and what will
Mm,
be. So the triangle. Um, what we know, I mean, from the triangle type images of the pyramid. With that Bosnian pyramid, apparently a whole load of Russian scientists took the complete dimensions of that pyramid and took about and created their own. And they said anything in that pyramid generated energy and became very healing because it changes the energy structure within the person. The Boston pyramids, a lot of people, it's used for healing because of that. We are all energy. Every single one of us is made up from a
mm,
frequency. And when that frequency is in harmony with each other, we are in health and we're in open mindedness, we're in open heartedness. When we block that energy, that's when we go into illness, dis-ease, when we go into despondency, depression, anger, or everything else. So that rhythm of life and harmony of life is so important. And very often we really need to look beyond the past, not the recent past, but the past, to
mm,
learn on how we can actually, balance ourselves out for the future. Don't dismiss things. Yes, it's probably been made into a fairy tale, but there are always origins to something. With the
mm.
werewolves, it's a human observation of these people with these wolf things running through the town, ripping people apart. I could see where that came from. But we do have ghosts. They are just
Mm.
energy signatures of people that are still
Yeah.
behind, and they can show themselves sometimes not for very long because it takes a lot of energy to do. You mostly feel them than see them. And I do believe the aliens are there and have always been here, and kind of they're almost scared to come down here right now. Are they going to get dissected and everything else? We've come in peace. Oh, let's chop and so um, I think with
Yes, I
everything
saw.
we see, there's a truth to something. There's a seed of
Yes,
truth to everything.
yes. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
I mean, the triangle is really, really interesting. And you've got a book on that, which,
I have indeed.
which goes all the way through that.
It
And
does indeed. I'll be holding it up to the camera there.
right.
And it's called The Mysterious Wold Newton Triangle: Wraiths, Werewolves, and Other Weird Tales from the Yorkshire Wolds.
And then you've also got Creating Imaginary Worlds. What is that about?
That is a book I wrote quite a few years ago now, but it's now available in paperback. It was previously only available on Kindle. And that is for writers who are interested in fantasy, science fiction,
Mm-hmm.
speculative fiction, and it's how to make your story plausible and to avoid its 12 basic tips
Mm.
of things to do. From I read an awful lot of this stuff and
Mm-hmm.
I encounter these sort of, if you like, failings people have, and I
Mm-hmm.
think, if only you've done that, it would have been so much better, and they haven't done that. So it's just little tips and trips
Mm-hmm.
how to make your world, your fantasy world,
Believable.
believable.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of male writers, back to male writers again, but they get obsessed with the gadgets,
Yes.
and the people are just like wooden clothes
Right.
pegs, and they don't have human emotions. They're
Right.
just sort of there
So
to
where's the connection then? Without that human
exactly,
connection, it doesn't matter what the gadgets are. When we read, we want to connect to this, the
exactly.
person in the book. We want to
You
feel them.
yeah, you want to feel whether you want the protagonist, the hero or the
Yeah.
heroine, to survive. What
Yeah.
you don't want is halfway through saying, "Oh, you know, take her,
Yes,
burn her at
exactly.
the stake. We don't care. She deserves it."
No.
And and it's the same with the villains. Very often the villains are just caricatures,
Yeah.
and your villains need a backstory. Why are they like that?
Right.
Why are they evil? What was the source of it?
Yes.
And
And also from the human nature, can we turn them around? Or are they
yeah,
just now pure evil, right? So, yeah,
yeah, it's to stop them being cliches,
yes,
and to just avoid little tips and trips like that, and to, I say, not get carried away with the gadgets or
yeah. Yeah,
the
my
big
brother's
picture.
just written a book on that, where a kind of a youth genre of outer space, saving the world, and all of that type of thing. But one of his books that really fascinated me was The Repercussions of Thomas D. And it's a young teenager talking on the phone to his girlfriend, and he goes through a wormhole, ends up in the 40s during a
Yeah,
bombing raid, and gets thrown into jail, which I can't remember why, but there's somebody else there, and he talks to him, and he reveals everything about the future and his phone and everything. And unbeknownst to him, the guy was a double agent working for Hitler. So it changes
yeah,
completely who won
yes,
the war and everything else, and how life would be now
yeah,
if they had. And so it was just, I love it when the coin flips and we get to see something from a different angle and a different perspective. I think
yeah.
that's really, really intriguing, and I love that type of thing. Now you have another book here, Shuckland.
Yes, Shetland. That's brings it up. That's very much the same idea as the Wold Newton Triangle, but it's set down here in the east of England on the Waveney Valley, which is between the counties of Norfolk and Suffolk. And it's of the folklore on this area, where I live, and it follows the river and the tales from the start of the river down to the sea. And it's called Shuckland because the big legend round here is Black Shuck, the demon dog that, according to legend, appeared in a church in the 16th century, running up and down the aisle, killing people right, left, and center, and then disappeared in a clap of thunder and appeared at another church about 20 miles away doing the same thing.
Mm.
and everything is black shuck oriented around here in the
Right,
folklore.
right.
So Shuckland was the obvious name to
Yeah.
call it. And again, it's the same thing. It's all the tales and linking them together and the stories and how they all hold together.
I mean, it's fascinating that it's, there may be fantastical type stories, but they're always based on some sort of origin or something. But it's also you're sharing a history that in folklore is being lost. The
Mm,
youngsters of today aren't really interested in that.
mm,
It is the modern gadget. It is, what else they can have in the world. And having something that still captures, the wonders of the past and why things are the way they are, what went on there, inviting an intrigue in
yes.
of the youth of today or anybody of today to look at it and understand that everything that we have today came from the past in one
Mm,
way or the other. And if you actually really do understand the past and why those things are those things, it helps you actually understand our own evolution as to where we are today. And we don't want to
yes.
lose that history. We don't want to lose those folk tales. We this idea of modern world is almost leaving everything like that behind and embracing the technology. And almost the characters in our own book have become more tech than it has character, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's going back to possibly a simpler life, but it's too straightforward. The storytelling, the
Mm-hmm.
tales that people told in the past, where did they get their ideas from? Um, and that's essentially folklore.
Yeah,
It's storytelling, and
yes. And that's been going on since
I'm
the beginning of time, right?
exactly, and hopefully we'll still go
Yes,
on. But
yes,
I say some of these tales need retelling
yeah,
and slightly repackaging
right,
because uh, there is a danger again. The dreaded academics get in there, and
yes.
folklore becomes very serious, and you've got to follow
Very
certain
dour.
patterns. Dower, yeah. There's no fun in it,
Right.
and it's the sense of fun I think that
Yeah.
needs to be brought back.
I'm always saying that if you haven't got wonderment in your life, what have you got? I mean, life is to be explored. I wonder this,
Mm,
I wonder that, willing to go on the adventure, whether it's intellectually, physically, emotionally, spiritually, just be willing to live in that wonderment. Because if, complacency is a killer. And, I don't need to know. Why should I need to
mm,
know? Well, how do you know what you need to know from it unless you're willing to read it, experience it, do it? It will reveal itself what you need to know through your
yes,
actions. So, and I think
yeah,
complacency is something, um, or abstaining from experiencing life in any way. And I think the
yeah,
more we know about the anything of the past, the more it opens up the possibilities or the intrigue for the future and the present that we live in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely, definitely.
So,
Um,
what drew you right in the beginning to write these things? Did you decide that there wasn't any representation out there and you wanted to be that representation?
um, um, I think it was going back to my childhood. We, growing up in England in the 1950s, television wasn't as pervasive as it is now, and
Right.
it used to, pack up at 10:30 or something. And we lived in a fairly spooky old house by the harbour side in Scarborough. And over Christmas and winter times, relatives would come round and we'd all sit round the fire and people would tell ghost stories,
Hmm.
about things that had happened to them and encounters
Yes.
they'd had. So I
Yes.
sort of grew up with
Right.
that,
Yeah.
if you like, oral storytelling.
Hmm.
And my family were big book readers.
Hmm.
So I read lots of books and all the ghost paperbacks of ghost stories and horror stories were
Hmm.
sort of coming out then and uh, affordable on my pocket money and things. And I was just intrigued by it. And then, as happens with a lot of people, the day job gets in the way and you've got to earn yourself a living
Right.
somehow. And so I drifted away from it. And then I was lucky enough to be in a position that I could return to it
Mm.
and, realize that was my first love, if you like,
Yeah.
and writing about it. And, the old cliche is write about what you know. Well, I know about the folklore of
Hmm.
um, the East Riding, and I know about the folklore down here. And
Hmm.
it followed on from that, really. And
And
I say,
a timeless book for anybody at any time and in pretty well any age, obviously more teens up. Um, but I think the more that people open up to where that folklore started, the more I think they start to question other things. And the more you
mm,
question, the more you wonder, and the more intrigued you are in that discovery, right? And I think more
yes,
it propels you forward. So, they sound like great books to open up that mind of, well, what else is out there that
yeah,
we don't know about? Because if we just dismiss it, then it goes by the way of the Ice Age, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose all that history there because there was a reason for that history, and the reason, like the triangle, is still there. That
yes,
triangle's energy and everything else that they recognize the triangle to be is still
yeah.
there. So it's paying attention to other triangles in the world where we
It
place
is.
ourselves.
It is.
Mhm.
It is. It is.
So, how do people get hold of your book, and how do they get hold of you or your
Right.
books?
You can get all my books on Amazon, um, and you can get some of them in bookshops. But for your listeners and viewers, Amazon is the best place,
Mhm.
both UK and .com, and they're available both in print and in Kindle digital format. And I say you can find me as Charles Christian, and I've got an author page on Amazon. But elsewhere, you can find me via my website, which is www.urbanfantasist.com. And that's got links to Amazon and the books and everything I'm doing. And I used to do a podcast. I've stopped doing that, but I'm now doing short videos, which you can find on YouTube. But again, they're linked from the website. So you can find everything about me on the website and, take it on from there.
The moral of the story is, folks, be inquisitive, not just what's going on now, but what has been, because that is, part of our decision making of what will be. So open up and just be intrigued with it. All land is old land, but what makes the history of how old is it as far as people living on it? And England itself, how many times has it been occupied? And look at the historical things that have been left behind with all the wonderful tales. And if we don't write it, if we don't speak about it, we don't read about it, we'll lose it. And we don't want to lose that history. It's the building blocks of who we are today.
Mm, exactly.
So folks,
Yeah.
go and out and get the book. So Amazon.com, Amazon.uk. Also, if you go to his site and go to the books, you'll see all of the books there too, which kind of lead to other things, have a little more explanation in them, etc. Have we got another book planned?
I've got a book coming out probably later this year. It's with the publisher, and they clearly like it because they've paid me the second half of my advance. And that is looking at witches and sorcerers through history from ancient times, biblical times, through to the present day, and looking at the different issues and how they've changed over time and what they've reported to have done. So
Right.
that's underway,
Oh, good.
and
Oh,
I've
good. You'll have to
got a
come back and
couple.
share that one.
I will do indeed as soon as
Yeah,
I've got a copy of it. I say I'm waiting for the proofs and things. So
wonderful. No,
I
that's
don't know
right
where
up
we
my
are.
street. That's right up my
Yeah,
street. Definitely. Yeah. Um, and again, witches, it depends what century you're in. You're either dunked or burnt at the stake, or you considered revered, and kings and things would have them as as their witch and the healers. And yeah, it's quite fascinating how through the centuries how they've gone up and down as good or evil. It depends on who they serve and what the time frame or what the church had to say, right?
exactly.
So very, very interesting. Yeah, so
Yeah,
please come back and share that one. I'd love to hear all
I will
about
do
that one.
indeed. Yeah, no, that's my pleasure.
So, folks, again, it's Urban Fantasist, Fantasist.com. You can also find him on Twitter, which is under the same Urban Fantasist.
It is indeed. Yep.
And please go to his site. Amazon will have his books in there. Just put in his name, Charles Christian. And please, these are kind of books that you could read as a family and then have a wonderful conversation about it, and maybe even
Mm,
send your kids down looking at other parts of history and opening up that world, because history is just something they boringly do at school and they have no interest in it. So we need to inspire that interest in them,
yes.
and who knows what else we'll uncover because of it. So books are always a wonderful gift to give anybody at any time, and to sit down and have a conversation about it afterwards is always very, very exciting. So don't forget to give somebody a book. Thank you so much, Charles. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a delight talking to you, Sarah.
Until next time, folks, do not think that it cannot be real. There's always a truth in everything. Until next time, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Find all of our shows on selfdiscoverymedia.com under podcasts or selfdiscoverymedia/shows. And for all our current shows, go to What's New. We are supported by you, the audience. You'll see a nice big shiny blue button for one-time donations, or follow us on Patreon and you will be able to support us there. We enjoy bringing you such wisdom. And the next show will be up in just a moment.